I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item C, approval of agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, Nick?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the council? No. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item D, presentations, public hearings, and related approvals. I think this is what you're all here for. Before we get started, I just want to mention we're going to kind of operate the meeting like we would a public hearing, just to kind of try and keep some order to it. Not that anyone's disorderly in any way, but so basically what that means is we'll have our presentation, and then everyone will get a chance to speak, and then we'll throw it back to the council for our discussion, and then if there's any other questions after that, and then it'll end in a vote at the end of the time. So just keep that in mind when it comes time for public comment. Please come to the podium, state your name, and we'd like to keep it within 3 minutes. Jerry's here, so we'll try to observe that for sure for him. But everyone else is free reign. All right, so I think we'll just throw it over to start our presentation. Leslie is here to give us an update on the air quality issue at the library. So
Yeah, I
We'll
think
get
I'll
started.
jump in there, Mr.
Sure.
Mayor, too. Just to provide just a brief background to what brought us here tonight. First, over the last probably 6 weeks to 2 months, we've certainly learned a lot about air quality matters and how to best address those. But clearly with this pretty impressive audience that I've never seen bigger at a Howard Lake City Council meeting, thank you for being here, by the way. I think we've also learned just the value of this library. I've spoke to quite a few residents, some of whom are in this room. And I think what's interesting to note, I try to at least follow it up with what do you need to hear as councils, like what you as residents need to tell the council or how they can support it, and frankly, how they use the library. And what I think is interesting to note, books came towards the end of that list. I think with our friends from Great River here tonight, they already know that, but I think that's something that we often forget. In fact, the reasons for this library are far more important than just books alone. It's a meeting place, it's a place to learn, it's a place to read newspapers. It's one of the few places with public Wi-Fi in Howard Lake. A lot of people use it for computer access and job training type opportunities. Yeah, so frankly, it's not a surprise that we're looking at a packed room. With that said, we've also tried to do what is right, not only for the staff of the library, because we want people to be safe and healthy when they're working in that space, but likewise for the patrons that are visiting. And the other thing that we've been trying to do a super careful job of is spend tax dollars wisely. So with that said, we have now completed a few air quality tests. This started in mid-January with an initial air quality assessment, followed by some exploratory remediation activities. I think that was good work and good money spent. In fact, I think we could argue that that kind of addressed the worst of the worst issues, and where we're at tonight is arguably better than where we were 6 weeks ago. Beyond that, we kind of tapped the brakes and began working with the League of Minnesota Cities. They're, as you know, a big technical resource, but they're also our insurance provider. They requested additional due diligence in the form of an industrial hygienist, who's with us tonight, to complete a microbial assessment of the library. And I think you guys know how well spoken I am, so I hope I said that right. She also completed some surface testing as well. And ultimately tonight, we're going to hear from that inspector, that hygienist, and as you said, Mr. Mayor, hopefully end with a vote that will ultimately set into motion what we need to do to reopen our library. So if there's no immediate questions, I will throw it over to Leslie Clunan with ATC Services. Come on up to the podium, Leslie.
Well, good evening. I am
Leslie, and I work for a company called ATC Group Services. So we're a third party. We were hired by League of Minnesota Cities to come out and do an assessment. And this is something I've been doing for a long time, over 20 years. So I sometimes tend to get a little technical. So if you have any questions, when it's time for questions, I'm glad to explain things in more detail. But to get started, we'll just kind of do an overview of what we did and what the results were and the recommendations. So we can get started. So I came out on February 1st. I met Nick and a woman from League of Minnesota Cities at the library. And I had a tour of the library first, and Nick told me a little bit about what had been going on. And then I started my assessment. So I always start with a visual inspection. So I'm looking for any evidence of conditions that might not be good for indoor air quality. And then we also have some tools. So I have a moisture meter so I can check moisture content of walls. And then I also have some sampling equipment. I have an instrument that measures airborne spore levels. So these are fungal spores from mold. And then I also do some other types of testing that we'll talk about. So what I found is, I was there on February 1st, so it's the middle of the winter. Conditions are pretty cold outside, so it's probably not representative of, in the spring when all the snow is going to melt. But at the time I was there, everything was dry. The walls were dry. There was no excess moisture in the walls. And I did not find any visible evidence of fungal growth, which is the same as mold growth. So there was no visible evidence. Some remediation had already been done by the time I got there. So there were two areas. One was under the stairwell that had been remediated, all the sheetrock removed, and then there was also another second area at the end of the hallway by the restrooms where they had done some sheetrock removal. So I'll have some photos too. So started upstairs and found a couple stained ceiling tiles, which is not unusual. I find those in most buildings. So they had gotten wet at some point. There was one in the community room, and then you can skip to the next slide, and then one outside the bathroom. So, sometimes there's some condensate drip or some roof issue, but it wasn't anything ongoing. Everything was dry. Then downstairs on the lower level, I'm sure you're familiar with that south block wall. There's some water drips down there, and Nick was telling me those had been there for a while, so it wasn't anything recent. It was an issue with when the stairs had been installed, and that issue I think was fixed. So, but those water drips are there, and that's just more water drips on the left. This is the containment at the end of the hallway. They had it all polyed off, which is standard protocol to make sure, when they're removing things, if they do find something, it isn't distributed through the library. So they set up a containment. And then this is after they've removed everything. So I did what we call a post-remediation verification. So I checked to make sure everything looked good and then did some sampling. So everything was dry. There was no fungal growth. Everything looked very clean. And this is a stairwell containment. So this is under the stairwell. It also was all clean and dry. The wood studs were dry. They'd been operating, that machine there is an air cleaning device. It has HEPA filtration. So they just, when they're done, they keep running that to make sure if there's anything in the air that it gets cleaned out. So it turns over the air and cleans the air. So that's the stairwell containment. More stairwell containment. So you can see everything looks very clean. So these are some pictures that were actually taken by a previous consultant or by the, I think the contractor that did the remediation work took pictures. So I was provided with the pictures, so I decided to include them so you could see what it looked like while they were doing the remediation. So that one's sideways, but you can see the back side of the sheetrock and the front side of the sheetrock before they took it out, and there was no visible fungal growth in the photos that they provided. There were some water drip marks, so it does look like on that side under the stairwell there has been some moisture that's come in through the block. And you can see on the right is the styrofoam insulation, so that's actually turned sideways also, but you can see the water drip marks across it. So that just indicates there has been some water coming in that area. Because of the way the wall's constructed, you know, there's the block, and then there's the styrofoam and the wood studs, and then there's a vapor barrier, and then there's the sheetrock. So that's probably why we didn't see any moisture or fungal growth on the sheetrock, because that styrofoam is not permeable, so it's good. It's keeping the moisture against the block until they can fix that moisture issue. I mentioned that I did some air sampling, so this is, I have a pump, and you put like a little cassette on it. It has a sticky surface, so the pump draws the air through, and any fungal spores that are in the air deposit on that sticky surface, and then I send that to the lab, and they look at it under the microscope, and they tell us what was in the air. So I give them an air volume, and so from that they can give us a concentration of what was in the air at that time period. So everyone's always concerned about mold in the air, but you have to realize there's mold outside, and so you're always having mold inside also. So what we do is we take an outdoor sample and we compare it to the indoor samples. And
Yeah,
everybody hear me okay?
more for
So-
TV, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so if you look at the bottom here, the total spore count was 250. So in the winter, this was February, the outdoor count is fairly low. So that's pretty normal. And you can see all the levels inside were the same or lower. So they ranged from 90 on the lower level by the children's books to 250 in that remediation area. So the total level did not indicate a problem. The other thing we look at with these results is the species of mold. So we look at the species that are outside, and we also know sometimes there's common outdoor species that may not show up always in the outdoor sample in the winter. So we compare that. And the only thing that was not similar to outdoors was one spore in that lower level stairs remediation room. So you see that Chaetomium 10, which was just one spore, but the concentration is 10 counts per cubic meter of air. So we did recommend they let that air cleaner run a little longer and wipe down the remediation area before they took that containment down. So, but it all looked, the air samples all looked really good. So there were no issues there. So the other thing I did was take dust from the carpet. So this is a sampling method. It's called micro vacuum, so it's kind of like vacuuming your rug with a little cassette. So I do that in different spots and then send that to the lab, and they actually have to culture it. So it takes a couple weeks to get results. So that took a little while. But these results, you can see, are not as good as the air sample results. So I took the lower level, kind of right next to where the stairwell was, but on the other side of the wall with the computers. So I took along the exterior wall there because we were wondering if, since there was some moisture coming in under the stairwell, we were wondering if maybe it went a little further into the library. So just on the corner by the wall, I took a sample of the dust, and it came out to be at the level that it's considered elevated. So that means that there's more mold spores in the dust than is normal. And the species present, we also look at the dominant mold species, is also often associated with mold growth on carpet. So it does look like there is some mold contamination on the carpet along that wall there. And I also took another sample by that south wall, since you'd had some past water intrusion there, and the book stacks right there, so I had to do it in the corner, kind of over by the stairwell, and that also was elevated. You can see that number is pretty high, so that was significantly elevated there. So the main issue then we found was the carpet fungal contamination. So along those exterior walls. So the conclusion is there is evidence of some past moisture observed on the lower level by the south block wall, and then from some of the information we received from the contractor before they did all their work, there was some moisture in the wood studs in that under the stairwell. So, and plus we could see the water drips. So there has been some water coming in that way as well. At the time of the assessment, we did not find any high moisture levels in the west wall. And there are elevated fungal counts in the dust, but the air samples were normal at the time that we were there. So once we got all that information together, we put together our recommendations. So I emailed some of these initially when we got the results, and then the rest put in the report. So basically, we're recommending cleaning the horizontal surfaces in the library. So basically, you vacuum with a HEPA filtered vacuum the surfaces and the carpet. Hard surfaces can be wet wiped to remove any settled fungal spores. And then have the carpet steam cleaned. So it's a hot water steam extraction, which is what we recommend because that really high temperature will kill any mold spores. And then we're recommending retesting to document that that was effective. And then once we get satisfactory results, then the library can be reopened. So that's the short-term recommendations. And then once we get to spring, when all the snow melts and there's more moisture, then that would be the time to bring in a building envelope specialist to figure out what the extent of that water intrusion is along the wall, because that's when it's going to be easier to detect moisture. And then we can perform some test cuts along the wall to see if there's any fungal growth. Hopefully it'll be the same as what we saw under the stairwell. We saw the moisture but not any fungal growth. But obviously you need to fix the moisture issue so none of this recurs. And then if something is found, then those materials will be remediated and the problem fixed, and then things rebuilt. So I think that was the last slide.
It is. Maybe before public comment, council, do you have any questions of Leslie?
I have just a couple.
Yep.
We talked about the steam cleaning of the carpet and then having it retested. And so for a long-term maintenance, if that yielded the result we were looking for, then how often should you have that carpet steam cleaned to prevent that from happening in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. you know, probably the most important thing is having a really good vacuum cleaner. So, if you can vacuum thoroughly with a HEPA filtered vacuum on a regular basis, then, I mean, I'd say maybe once a year.
Okay.
You don't want to do it when it's like really humid out, but,
Sure.
because it's very important that it dries quickly, like within 24 to 48 hours. But the hot water steam extraction will, you know, it kind of depends how much foot traffic you have and how dirty it is. But, you know, the high traffic areas you might need to do more often, so.
Okay. And then I just had one other question. So you took air samples from outside to kind of establish a baseline to compare to the air samples inside. Obviously, you can't really do that with the carpet samples, but is there any sort of baseline or anything to compare it to, you know, the results that we received from the library carpet in comparison to, you know, a general building or?
Well, in my report, I also put some guidelines. So if you look in the report, we have ranges, and that's based on, you know, people's years of research, kind of
Okay.
normal versus non-normal carpets. So if you look at the report, you'll see more details and guidelines as to what level is high.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
that will help. What
Okay.
level and then what species indicate an issue. So it's also looking at those indicator organisms.
So then is it safe to assume that the spores in the air are a result of the fungal evidence in the carpet since there was no fungal growth on the walls?
Well, there's, the ones in the air at the time when I was there were probably just ones that come in
Okay.
through the HVAC system.
Got it.
You know, if someone's, where I found the issue was along the wall. So, you know, if someone's vacuuming with a kind of an older vacuum that doesn't have a HEPA filter, that can put things into the air.
I see.
But, you know, it was on the wall, so probably not a lot of people walking in that area.
Right.
So,
Okay. Thanks.
yep.
Oh, sorry, I stole your question. Okay, I don't think the council has any other questions at this time, so I think, thank you very much for your
Sure.
thorough report and for coming here tonight. We really appreciate that. There is, if anyone wants to see the full report, I think, I don't know how.
We'll put it online,
Okay,
and
I
as
was
well
saying
as
it's
this
not-
presentation following this.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail in there, and it's very technical, and if you understand all of it, then you're a million times smarter than I am, so. So I think we can open up to public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
You can- So if anyone has anything to share, or a question, or just general comments, please step up to the podium, state your name, and fire away. Don't everybody all rush at once. Sure, go ahead, Jerry. Thanks.
Don't start my clock.
I won't. I'll wait till you utter the first word, and then I'll hit the button.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council and staff and guests. As you know, I went through this 12, 15 years ago, Gene. I am very much in support of this because I agree with what Nick says, how important that library is for us. You just can't measure it. But my biggest concern is, it sounds to me, you have to look at the records. I assume they were probably pulled and checked from this project before. There was a lot of similarities as this mind, if it can remember back that far. And I just emphasize the need to get either a construction engineer or an architect really involved in that to make sure it's done right. We did a lot of patchwork, and evidently it must have worked because it's 12 years later, but don't be afraid to spend money to do it right, please.
So, can I just ask you a question, Jerry? When you talk about getting a construction or an engineer person involved, do you mean to fix the drainage issue on the outside?
Make sure it's
or-
being done right. We were to believe that part of the problem was the roof and the drainage,
Oh, okay.
and we didn't do a new roof or anything like that, but that water's coming from all the way up and running down. If you're seeing it outside, it's definitely inside of the block.
Right, yeah.
And as you know, I base those comments based upon being a general contractor. I can't go over and fix that because I'm not licensed, by the way. I'm licensed, but I can't do the removal.
So that wasn't an advertisement then?
No. I would give some advice if you want to talk about it sometime, but I appreciate you doing this work.
Well, thanks. Sure, come on up.
Hi, my name is Pat Shepoister, and I've lived in Howard Lake since 1965, approximately. Sometimes I think it's nice just to know a little bit of history of what you're working with, the library. Back in the 70s, our library was where the off-sale liquor store is now. And some of us in town decided that it was just too small. Our story hour was getting bigger, and it was being used more. Besides, it had the liquor store right beside it, and we didn't think, it was a good atmosphere for us to be sending our children to hear stories. And then, of course, it was across Highway 12. And I'm not saying the people on the other side of the highway did not use it, because they definitely did. But what I am saying is that probably the majority of the people were on the other side of that highway. And at that time, Highway 12 did not have flashing lights or anything to tell motorists that that was a crosswalk. So we had all those concerns. So we got together, there were 4 of us, and we got together and we decided to go to the council. Now, I don't remember why, and it's not necessary to remember why, but for some reason, the city council did not want to help us build a library. So they basically told us if we could get the money, we could do it. Well, the people that were on the library, like me, we didn't have a city administrator. We had absolutely no idea how to go about doing this. So we talked to a few people, and there was only one man on this committee, by the way. There was a man. Rod Warner was the man. And then Elaine Dahl and Margaret Barth were the other people on it. But anyway, so I can remember we tried to write grants. We had no idea what we were doing, and of course, we sent them in, but of course, we didn't get any money. So we went back to the council again, and they still just wouldn't fly. Told us again, if we could get the money, we could build it. And we said, well, we only have one way we're going to do this, and that's if we get a, I forgot what you call it.
Referendum?
Referendum, thank you. If we got a referendum. So that's what we decided to do. And we were also told, you can do a referendum, but this town is not going to pass that referendum. So I'm as of the age now, I'm in my 70s, so I'm one of the people that I'm talking about, but back then I wasn't this age. But we decided that possibly the only way we were going to get this passed was if we got the elderly people involved. And that's when we got the idea of having a community room, because the senior citizens really had no place to meet in Howard Lake. So that's what we did. And I remember to this day, where the Mexican restaurant is now was Red's Pizza at the time. And Margaret and Elaine and I sat there and we watched the people go in, because that's what we voted then, was in this library, city hall place. And we watched the people go in. And the more we watched, by the time we were ready to go home, we knew we had that referendum passed. And it was the senior citizens of Howard Lake that passed that referendum for us. And that's how we got the library, is that some of the people in this town knew it was so important for our youth and for our seniors to have some place to go. And it's just kind of nice to know the history, that's all.
Oh, that's a great story.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
story.
Thank you.
Anybody
It's a
else?
tough act to follow, guys.
Yeah, no kidding.
She pushed me to do it.
I knew you
I
had
would
it
say
in you,
that's the first
Bridget.
time anyone's ever had to beg you to talk, Bridget, I think.
I'm not a talker, so this is a little overwhelming.
Right.
I'm just gonna push it off back here. I'm gonna do this.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous.
Take a breath in and let it out. Okay. So I am Bridget Stanley. I grew up here as well. I left for a long time, and now here I am. Ta-da! I'm back. So I want to say how important the library is. I started out using the Annandale Library. I went to the Howard Lake when I was wee big, and I remember getting Ingalls Wilder books there all the time. So then I was like, I'm not a reader. Like, no, People Magazine is what you got out of me. So when I went to Annandale, I started becoming a preschool teacher. My husband was on the road all of the time, and it was like, I can't afford movies. I can't afford to buy all these children books. So with the library, I was able to entertain my husband in the semi for weeks at a time. I could get bags of preschool books for the kids at school. I could go to the bookstore in St. Cloud, make a list of all these books I wanted because I don't have $40 a book. So then I'd go to the library and I'd make my 9-mile list to do it. So not only did I use it for movies, but for books, but for the internet and for Girl Scouts, because I would get the groups together and we would do activities at the library. And the library also offers a lot of free activities that I as well get a bunch of friends together and we go and do them and just have a great time with it. So just with the library in itself, I know, yep, it probably costs a lot of money, but there's really not a lot of activities to do in Howard Lake as well. So if I'm at work and my kids need something to do that's not going to cause them to get in trouble, or they're not going to use up all my internet data, they can go sit at the library and they can look at a book, they can look at a magazine, they can go on the internet, they can do the free activities that the library offers. So I just want to advocate how I am so for the library being in this small community, because sometimes I don't have the ability to have a driver's license. So having it here is very helpful for me and for my family, and so that I don't have to depend on going somewhere else to do it. So I find it very, very important. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Bridget. Anybody else have anything to share, or? No? Going once? Going twice? All right, I guess we'll move on. If you think of something, just raise your hand. We don't need to be so formal. All right, where are we now, Nick? On our, so I guess we're kind of back to the council now. Any other comments or questions that the council might have? I guess for the public or for our expert or representatives from the library?
You know, for myself personally, the library has always been important, not only for me, but I have a grandson who would come every other weekend from the St. Cloud area, and one of our first stops as soon as the library opened when he was little to get our stash for the weekend. And now I have a new little granddaughter who is part of the reading program, and I really miss the library when it got so cold. I mean, being confined and not having those books, and I'm sorry, but Cokato, when it was 20 below zero, was a trip. Where, you know, I was downtown for something, for milk or groceries, and I thought, oh, I miss that library. So, you know, it's an important thing for all ages in Howard Lake, and that's been proven. No matter what your age, that is an important asset to Howard Lake. So whatever we can do to keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jean. I mean, I love the fact that we have a library in Howard Lake. You know, much like Bridget, I have memories of my time at the library in Winston when I grew up there. And, you know, it's kind of something that you always remember. And then eventually, like we did, you work your way back there as an adult in, you know, kind of a different capacity. But the goal is still the same, to, you know, use the library. And I think we talk a lot about on this council about, and kind of to Jerry's point, about doing things the right way. And, you know, that's why we went through all of this work, and unfortunately have taken this much time to kind of figure out where we're going with this. You know, the council had a retreat earlier, or a few months back, and we kind of settled on a number of goals and strategies that we see as important for the community of Howard Lake. And the library kind of ticks off a great number of them for all of us, you know, whether it's entertainment or providing diverse amenities for our residents, ensuring safe and healthy community. You know, there's a bunch of goals that we have that the library really, really meets. So to not do it the right way and to just ignore the issue obviously is not the answer. So I mean, it's great to see all of you here. I'm assuming everyone's in support for the most part. I'll get to you in just a second. I'll wrap it up, don't worry. But it's really nice to see the support. I mean, we don't, you know, we hear it individually, I think, from our own family and friends and on the street, but to see you here as a group is really puts kind of some power to what we're doing. So go ahead. Yeah, could you please? Otherwise, the microphone doesn't pick you up, and then you're not heard on cable TV. It's just a disaster.
My name is Katie Huff, and I want to say thank you for addressing it as a city council and the city. I also just wanted to mention that one of the most important things, besides all like really the warm fuzzies that we all have and get when we go into a library and check out books and have access to things, is for every town that has a library, you have a safe place for people that lots of times don't have other safe places, or maybe they're, the people on the outskirts of society can kind of access things, and a friendly, smiling face and help, because that's what librarians and library workers do, is they just help. It's like one big question mark. People go to libraries for everything. It's not even just books. It's just amazing. And I know that all the things that are being discussed are potentially costing a lot of money. And I know we're a small town, but I can't stress enough the goodwill that it engenders to invest heavily, if need be, in something like that in a community. And I just want to say that, and thank you, because it's important. Again, everybody thinks it's important, but.
And I think another important thing to point out, you know, each year we get a report from the library, and every year we see our numbers go up, and in comparison to the libraries and surrounding communities, I think ours are always quite a bit higher, which is, I think, something we should be proud of. You know, it's not just people from Howard Lake. And, you know, when you look at the whole picture, the library is bringing people to town, then that's a whole nother goal that we don't intend it to have, but it just happens. So
We do have Karen Ponsack, the Executive Director of Great River. Would you like to say anything? Yeah, thank you.
welcome.
So I'm Karen Ponsack. It's been a couple of years since I've seen the council, but thanks for having me here tonight and having a public setting for everyone to talk about the library. I want to thank Nick and Aurora for their work behind the scenes to getting us here to this point. And I want to thank everybody who came and told their story or didn't tell their story. You know, Great River is a 6-county system. We have 32 libraries, and it really helps me do what I do to know that there's people in every town like this, just big library supporters. And library service is the kind of service that when it's working really well, you don't hear a lot about it. And when things get a little wrinkly, people show up. And it's because it's important. It's important for lots of different reasons. And this has been a long process. And it's hard to be patient through a long process. A couple of years ago, I think some of you would have heard about the St. Cloud arson situation. We had an air quality issue there too, in a much bigger building. And it took us 3 months to get that library reopened. But every day, people were coming to the front door, they were sitting out front, using the Wi-Fi. And we learned about things like industrial hygienists, which who knew they existed, but thank goodness they do. So we can get a better handle on amorphous concepts like air quality to make sure that those libraries are safe and welcoming spaces for the staff and for all members of the public, because there's lots of different people using those libraries for lots of different reasons, including here in Howard Lake. And I know there have been some concerns expressed that we wouldn't get the building reopened here. Clearly, that's not the goal here tonight, and I'm here to tell you that's not the goal from Great River either. We're working hard to get that done, but we need to make sure that it's ready to go. Like, we couldn't open the door tomorrow right now. There's been remediation done. There's plastic up. There's stuff all over the library. So we need to get those things done first. We need to get those test results back. And then we'll know where we're at. We'll probably have to do some groundwork outside. Lord knows this is the winter that will test whether the water is going to come into the building or not. So I think we'll get some real answers on what needs to happen, and we'll be ready to move forward. If anybody has any questions, I'll be around for a little while after too. So thank you for all your work on the City Council and your dedication to the library. This isn't the kind of thing that comes along when you expect it, and they're really difficult. The fact that you made time during your week to have an extra meeting just to talk about this says a lot about the commitment of the City of Howard Lake. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Want me to throw it back to you? Or?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ultimately tonight, what we're looking for from the council is to accept the report that has been drafted by ATC along with the recommendations that you see on the screen in front of you. That would be in the form of a motion, but that would also set into literal motion the activities that you see in front of you, which include cleaning the horizontal surfaces, the HEPA vacuuming, the steam cleaning of the carpet, and additional retesting. I do not have exact costs for those things, but I would speculate it that it's roughly in the same ballpark of what we've put into testing to date, which is a couple $1,000s. At that point, like I said, we would work with Great River to reopen the library just as soon as we possibly could. Once we have, I'll just follow up with saying, the longer term things that we need to do as noted, and Jerry, I think you did a nice job of kind of indicating as well, really need to happen in the spring or summer once we have frost out of the ground and we're able to look at the overall structure. I have been in contact with a company that specializes in the envelope of the structure itself, and they look at just about everything. Like a lot of the folks that I've been talking to on this issue, they come with fancy titles and letters after their name. I think like a facilities engineer or something. I'm not, the name escapes me now, but they're properly adequately ready to address this issue. But that would come before you once we have that information ready.
So in terms of the cleaning and that sort of thing, who do you hire to do that?
There's been an outfit that we've worked with actually on this issue that's that would be just fine. Basically, you need to be a professional cleaner that's aware of air quality issues. It's not just, you know, Nick walking in with a vacuum. It's an actual certified cleaner that understands this issue.
And who would be responsible, you know, if we needed to update the vacuum cleaner there, who's responsible for that? Something?
We are. Yep, absolutely.
So at any point, do we consider just replacing the carpet? I mean, I know we've kind of talked about that in other city buildings. I don't expect you to have a price off the top of your head, but, you know, is that a better option?
Yeah, so there's some good and bad with that. I think it would likely definitively address that issue, assuming that we time that to coincide with the exterior work. So my recommendation would still be to use the steam cleaner now. And even if you have positive, like favorable results afterwards, perhaps after we do the greater envelope activities outside, we do the carpet maybe in the fall or something.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
Just in terms of staging the overall project.
Right.
I can tell you that in terms of logistics, it's kind of a nightmare, even in a 2,000 square foot library, to move all the circulation, the computers, the technology. And ultimately, that's what really held us up from replacing it just within the last year or two. So I think if that's something that you wish to see done, I would include that with the later recommendations.
Okay.
Right, because my feeling would be, let's wait, because let's see what happens this spring. That's my fear.
Yeah.
Is what are we gonna see when
Sure.
everything starts to melt?
Yeah. And where are we with, how does the insurance claim, I mean, this is gonna be just a city expense, right? Because the
Yeah.
insurance.
It's not likely that anything moving forward will be covered by our policy. Mold is not in and of itself a claim under the league. Likewise, water events, as we've described, are. But this isn't a traditional water event. It's not
Right.
like a flood or something of that sort.
So even if we did find some infiltration, it wouldn't be covered.
Likely not. If you were to build this building new today, it would be done differently with just different techniques, different grading and so forth. Ultimately, it's just the price we pay with the building that we have.
Anything else, Council? So just to back up, you want this in two different motions? Well, we need to accept the report. Obviously,
Yep.
that's one motion. And then the recommendations for remediation is what we're looking at. You
Yep,
want
direct
those two
staff to
separate?
commence the recommended activities for reopening the library.
And just to kind of back up, we are recommending exactly what Leslie recommended in her report, correct?
Correct.
We deem that to be suitable. Okay. And then who will have to follow up with scheduling, retesting? Is that something that staff will do? Okay. All right, so let's take the first action, I guess, is to accept the air quality report as presented, if somebody wants to make a motion.
Is there any foreseeable timeline on how fast that could all happen, though?
Good question.
So,
The reason I say that, as I mentioned earlier, is a teacher actually approached me and said, I have a field trip scheduled for my class that would like to utilize the library, and we're concerned that it isn't going to be ready soon enough. And she can't be here tonight, so.
yeah, so I'm slightly apprehensive to give a timeline.
I have a HEPA vacuum at home.
Your Dyson's not good enough for this.
What I can tell you is I will follow up with the initial calls to vendors and contractors tomorrow to get someone in as soon as possible. I'll also be in contact with Karen about the library-centric activities because it's going to be kind of a cooperative effort between Great River and the city to move forward. That's the best I can do right now.
So that was like the best non-answer answer I've ever heard.
So I can also address, if we're not doing things like test samples into the wall, some of the more obtrusive things that could have been into consideration. Typically, the vendors that I have been working with are pretty responsive to get to the site within just a few days. And I don't see anything that's on this list that's especially time consuming. So once they get here, it's probably a couple more days. Once those activities are done, there's going to be a pretty good put the library back together party by Great River as well, because it really is in shambles right now.
Well, and let me ask you, Karen, from Great River's perspective, is this plan that we have that we're kind of looking into tonight for cleaning and rectifying the situation, I mean, is that acceptable to Great River? I guess, maybe we should ask you.
Yeah, I would like that, yes. Great question, Pete.
So, we got the report within the last couple of days.
Yeah.
So, and I'm no air quality expert, but I defer to the experts. And if we have an industrial hygienist hired by the League of Minnesota Cities telling us that this is what we should do, Great River will follow that lead. I think the real question becomes, if you find out you have to do a lot of major building activity in order to remediate the water issues down the road, we might have to have other conversations about what the city of Howard Lake wants long-term
Sure.
for that building. We've talked a lot about, could we move the books upstairs? Could we move the books downstairs? Yeah, there's just a lot of things that take longer, even doing those steps in the interim. So what we did add was a few extra hours out in Cokato. I know for those of you who aren't driving, that's not enough. The Wi-Fi is on, but I know it's cold outside. So but yeah, in short answer, we're going to be working closely with Nick as we have been through this whole process, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to our first point of action, accepting the report as presented. We will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further questions from the council? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now we want to entertain a motion to proceed with the cleaning recommendation as presented, remediation recommendation.
Yeah, ultimately, you're directing me to set in motion the recommendations that are on the screen in front of you.
Okay.
Okay. I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, so there we go. I think that's all we have on our agenda, right?
Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. We
Yes.
really appreciate it. It's nice to see some faces in the crowd once in a while. It's nice to hear from people.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
The community center is not affected?
Correct. Good question, though.
I haven't rented in it, but I just want to make sure.
Yes. Yes. Community center is not affected by, right, I mean, yes, agreed. So, I don't have an agenda in front of me, so I don't know where I'm at, but,
Adjourn, Mr. Mayor.
all right. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.